Once again, it is Rodney and Alfie talk metal. Well, kind of metal for this episode. I am one half of your host team, Rodney McGee. You can find me under Rodney McGee, ironically, on YouTube, and my partner in crime is...
Hello, that's me, Alfie Williams, and you will find me on YouTube if you search for Witchbase, and I'll be right there.
All right. Well, I think this week is going to be somewhat of a follow-up to last week, where we were talking about a number of different topics, but when we stumbled into the hair metal issue, it seemed like it got a lot of comments, and a lot of people kind of interacted with it, so I thought that having a episode where we actually define what is hair metal, in my opinion, it doesn't exist. It's a name for something that's not metal. And what bands that are there bands that kind of got labeled as that didn't really deserve it, and why? And why did something get called hair metal? So we're doing an investigative report on bad music.
A post-mortem.
Yes. Because that shit is dead.
I find it really confusing. It again, with most of these topics, a lot of it was I grew up in the aftermath of these things. And as a young person, I didn't really have a large community of metalheads to draw upon. So for me, I would always say, like, I'm a fan of heavy metal. But when I thought about heavy metal in the 80s, I always meant glam metal. And again, that's just sort of my misinterpretation of the word. And like you said, things are miscategorized. How was it in the US growing up with glam metal and metal? Was there a key difference between these two genres? Because for me, it just felt like one big bucket, that heavy metal, and I mean from the 80s, and glam metal were synonymous. They interchanged quite often.
Well, and that's part of the problem, I think, at least especially from my point. And I can come at this from two different angles, being like a young listener of this, and then also being someone who, because I started touring really early, had to deal with people's thoughts on, what I did when I said, what I did. So I think we have to kind of define the terms.
Okay.
And
that would help.
I think when people say either glam or hair metal, it's kind of synonymous. It's very glossy image and it's not heavy. Like I don't think of anybody who's really a brutal metal band that I would also call hair or glam metal. The other part of it being that because, and this is really, I think a lot of this comes down to the symptom of MTV.
Yeah.
Is that because image became such a massive thing that it almost was, and this is one of the ironies that I don't think people that, I'll be kind about glam and stuff like that for a minute, that they didn't realize about the 80s is that a lot of these guys that were dressing in these ridiculous outfits or this insane hair, it wasn't because they necessarily thought it looked good. Having known a few of them, or even when you talk to them in interviews, it was this constant like nuclear escalation of that MTV and these, national, your video representation, they wanted something bigger. It's kind of like how news is now. It has to be more hysterical every time you watch it. If you want a video, they want something that people are going to go, what the hell is that? And want to watch it again and talk about it. So the more ridiculous your outfits, the more ridiculous your hair, the more you're going to get played. And I've got a couple examples of how, you can see this evolution in bands, and I feel it kind of proves my point. But a lot of times it was just a ridiculous over the top thing to get attention. And these guys were doing it by, that by any means necessary type of thing, that they're just going at it and going, if I grow my hair even longer and put more Aquanet in it and all this other crap, my video is going to go in rotation. And the more absurd I look, And I mean, getting into regular rotation on MTV was basically the Willy Wonka golden ticket.
Yeah.
Your album sales were immediately going to shoot up. So I think it became this feedback loop of bands, especially in the Sunset Strip and, the California metal scene and stuff, were starting to do outrageous things with their looks and things. And then when MTV started noticing the more ridiculous the image or outrageous, that attracted more views, then it just becomes this arms race back and forth of, we have to get more ridiculous. Oh, that's getting more views. We want even more ridiculous. So now we have to get, and it just keeps escalating until, you get to the point of like bands like Pretty Boy Floyd and, shit like that. But so when I talk, at least, and I think the authentic way about it, because I am the authority, about hair and glam metal, it's honestly, I define it as it was just a name given to, and as we talked about before, bands that were just really pop bands. And they wanted, because, this type of metal or some of its affectations was on the way up, they wanted to pull from it and use that to get their video played or lean into it. Not saying at all that, say, people in Los Angeles or something are whores and will basically do any kind of music when they're really just after fame to get in front of a camera. But when you look at, I've challenged people before to tell me what is metal about a couple of performances I can show. When you have everything that's a signifier of other things, like just because you have distortion on your guitar does not mean metal. Metal is an attitude. It's, there's an approach to it. And when you see guys that are singing very pop, hook-oriented choruses, incredibly upbeat party songs, there's no aggression in it whatsoever. They're dressed in, bright, sparkly colors. They have choreographed dance moves, all this stuff. I'm like, explain to me the difference in between this and every other pop video at the time. There's absolutely nothing separating it. I mean, you could take, Talk Dirty to Me from Poison and do like a video from Heart at the same period, and they basically look like the same people. Big hair, big shoulder pad coats, and ridiculous animal print and stuff like that. Heart was a classic rock band that started to look that way because that's what was in, and Poison looked the same way. They were no heavier than each other. Why is one just a rock and roll band with two women in it and the other suddenly heavy metal? No, I don't think so. It doesn't work. And, Hart even says, when you see interviews with like Ann Wilson and stuff, how she just thought it was disgusting and it was, the trend of that era and they got pressed into it and stuff. And she said it was because that's what was selling in pop and what was on MTV. Same thing that's going to appeal with Poison. So, I'll drill down into it further, but that's why I've always invalidated that as being metal, because it's just not. It has none of the hallmarks of metal. The songwriting style isn't the same. The structure isn't. The lack of pop gloss to it isn't. The look of it has no aggression whatsoever. And so that's why I see that as separate. The problem I think that gets glossed into it is you had bands during that era that were what I would either call just hard rock bands, just maybe not even metal, or some, mainstream metal bands that also, because that's what the industry demanded at that time, really started putting on these big visual presentations and stuff. They got kind of into that glam metal thing and everybody put them together. Like we talked earlier, you can take two examples of what would be called hair bands. And I'm like, are you really going to give me a comparison in between Poison and Wasp? It's like, you've got a guy with a buzzsaw on a codpiece drinking blood out of a skull and faux torturing women on stage and singing songs, about some horrific shit. And then you've got Poison.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, these aren't the same thing.
No.
And when you listen to, a lot of Wasp songs, they are every bit as heavy as that era Judas Priest releases.
Yeah.
I mean, you want to take, you got Another Thing Coming versus anything off the first Wasp album. It holds up. So I think it's, that's where that confusion came in. And I can remember that from touring a lot, that, I just turned 17 and I'm on the road, and, that era has, pretty much eaten shit and everything. But still, when I would tell people I'm in a metal band, they would go like, "Oh, so you're like what, like Warrant?" Like stuff like that. Like, no, the fuck. But that's what they associated with it. They got, to a mainstream audience, they thought Warrant was heavy metal. And I'm just going, Slayer, like what? We're not talking about the same thing at all here. And it comes down to, I think, marketing,
mm-hmm.
and the fact that, just like we were talking about with the last episode, that pop music bit so hard off of metal that they just started using more distortion on their guitars and pretending like that put them in a certain category.
Yeah.
And on that note, I'm not even pissing on that music. I don't like it, but, without naming names, I know some of the guys in some of these bands, and even they go, "Dude, we're not a metal band." Like, they would never sit there in a room and be like, "We don't play heavy metal. That's ridiculous." At most, most of them just call themselves, we're a rock band, pop rock, but, that's what we do. And they're like, I don't know where people got this metal thing. Like they're okay. I know some guys that are okay with you calling them a glam band. They're like, yeah, we're big on our image. We like our thing and stuff, but we're not glam metal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, in a weird way, when you think about those two words, they're almost contradictory.
Yeah.
Glam
totally.
and metal. Metal is the stripped down animalistic aggression. You don't glam that. That's like sequins on a turd. It doesn't quite match. So the long end of that being, that's, if we're going to define it, at least for me, that's what glam is. It's,
sequins on a turd.
You get things like Winger. Show me the metal. Again, not pissing on him. Like, Reb Beach is still one of my favorite guitar players. And then you've got, the quality of musicianship in that band. You had Rod Morgenstein. These incredible players in here, but it's not metal. On no planet can somebody play She's Only 17 from Winger to me and then play me Ride the Lightning and convince me that those are anywhere near the same thing. And it's fine. But like I said, I think it really came from like this weird kind of molding and melding of everything being image over all during that period. And then when the one escalating image became the same thing, when you've got Heart, Winger, Poison, and then some of the actual rock and roll bands of that era starting to adopt that image too, because they were, pressured into it, people just start seeing it all as the same thing. And they stop kind of critically thinking like, no, all this is different. That's why, like, even in the early, when you see early pictures of some of the heavier bands from the later era, they kind of had that look. Look at like, there are some early pictures of like Metallica. And you could see like Hetfield had his hair poofed up a little more and had like the animal print bandanas on his arm. Stuff's like it was everywhere.
What, Pantera?
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of makes the argument too. You can see some of these bands' evolution. So So that's kind of my thing on it. Does that make sense with how you saw it later, or?
That, yeah, there's, oh wow, there's tons to unpack in that, so I'll do my
Mhm.
best. But yeah, you've kind of explained it to me. Say explain. You've kind of, I'm picking up on breadcrumbs here on how I've come to my own conclusions. And like I said, I called these bands hair metal or that sort of thing. And it makes sense why I did that. It's because it was marketed that way. But then going back to that period, I'm trying to think, how did it get there? And my thoughts are, you have the metal fans sitting in a bar in their black clothes, watching Iron Maiden or Judas Priest, like we discussed before. And MTV comes along and they're like, okay, we got this new format. Women or even young girls are watching TV too. How do we get more females to watch TV? Well, why don't we get some good looking guys and make them a bit more feminine? Hey, metal's pretty cool. That's pretty edgy and underground. Let's call glam metal. Okay, then it's starting to make sense. So you're starting to draw in, more customers, the female population,
Sure.
and it's starting to unravel for me now. Where you're taking, you mentioned, what was it? Basically, the arms race of the hair. So someone's hair gets higher and higher. This is the equivalent of Slipknot and wearing masks today. Where what can we do? Well, they've got a crazy mask. They've got a more devilish mask or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's just an evolution of how demonic can we make this look. It's the same thing with the hair. And it just feels like
Yep.
we're taking the edgy pieces of the musical, what am I looking for here? Culture or zeitgeist.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just sort of making it more appetizing to the general population.
Sure.
That's sort of the way I'm reading this. And that kind of makes sense in the MTV era. My only question is, how do we get from black garb like we had in, Black Sabbath, Priest, whatever, and just do the complete opposite in a color rainbow of sparkles and sequins? Like how did we do that? That's an arms race in and of itself.
Well, yeah, and that goes to that thing though. It's like when something, and we talked to off audio about this a bit too. It is that arms race, and management and a label is always going to push you to get the biggest distribution, and most bands want big distribution. And if you're told you can release your song however you want, but if you give us more spectacle in the video, because we are a visual medium, not an audio one, we will put you in more rotation. Bands are going to start doing that. And that's what they go into. I can show example after example after example of this going on. I mean, we'll put it that way. Heart being a perfect example. You had just a classic rock band, and those girls never dressed crazy. They never had the massive hair and stuff. And then they put out that one album in the 80s, and all of a sudden, they've got this big boosted out hair and the leggings and all this crap. But if you want to keep it more hard rock and metal and bands with a history, I'll give specific videos to do back to back, and you can see exactly around the same era that somebody stepped in and told them, boys, time to look more like ladies. To take probably the most extreme example of just apeshit image, Twisted Sister.
Mm-hmm.
If you watch their video for You Can't Stop Rock and Roll off that album, ironically filmed, I believe it was in London.
All right, didn't know that.
They look like bikers.
Yeah.
They've got denim jackets on, leather pants. They've got, the whole thing on. Like, they look like the kind of guys you would see at a rest stop in like Tempe, Arizona or something, and probably get your ass whipped for a handful of meth. Very, aggressive, masculine, male looking stuff. Follow up, look at I Wanna Rock.
Damn right.
Now they're all in pink and black. They've taken the Twisted Sister thing to its furthest extreme. They're all wearing this ridiculous makeup. You could not get away from, those two videos. It was just, if you were going to watch MTV, you were going to see Twisted Sister. That was just the thing of it. On the more, what we think of as glam example, Whitesnake. Mm-hmm. Whitesnake was a blues rock band. I mean, David Coverdale came up in the Deep Purple type of thing and stuff. Look at a video earlier, like Slow and Easy. Again, denim, rock and roll, bluesy rock type of thing. Then their self-titled album, same type of music, but all of them like sequin jackets and, flared out pants, Coverdale's hair is massive, all this type of stuff. And they were called a hair metal band. And it's like, well, they were just kind of a blues rock band.
Yeah.
But I can tell like they got some songwriters in, probably like Desmond Child or something like that. They came in and did a couple songs for them to get that adult contemporary kind of thing going. But you see that transformation. You can name this through a number of bands. Watching ones that already had a settled vibe and image that go into it. Ozzy Osbourne. He was the Prince of Darkness. Ultimate Sin comes in and he comes out looking like one of the Golden Girls. He looked like a methed out grandmother.
Yeah.
He's even got like in that video, like, was it Shot in the Dark? He's got like this little doily thing hanging off of his microphone that's got sequins on it.
For God's sake.
Yeah, his hair's all fried out. He looks like when your grandma goes to get a perm and they burn it up or something. The whole band wearing that stuff, which God bless Jake. I noticed he put on just a long trench coat to cover that whole thing. He was not going for it. But yeah, everybody in the band, spandex, sequins, all that. The Prince of Darkness. They even got to him. And they were like, next album, you want to go big? And it did. He put out Shot in the Dark and you could not get away from that video.
Isn't that just bizarre? Like, you had, obviously, speaking about Ozzy in particular, he's come from Black Sabbath. He knows, if you take the whole metal vibe, you know what works. And then just someone, I can probably name who, said, dress this way and just do completely the opposite image. Like, how did it get to that? That's just wild. But the other thing I wanted to go back to was, you mentioned hair metal isn't just I can't remember the exact word you said now, but hair metal doesn't just mean you use distortion on your guitars and now you're metal and all of the song structures are different. That's totally right. And it depends how badly you want to split hairs here. Metal is an attitude. There are certain structures for metal bands that we follow. It's not just like punk and 3 chords. It just, the more we talk about it, the more it seems that metal is not the right name for this type of music. I can live with glam. Glam's fine. But now I take it you wouldn't call that something else, because real musicians can play glam. And this isn't.
Yeah, but I don't have a problem with that, though. Yeah, real musicians can. But when you're doing something like that and you go under a style that says a part of what we do is our image, like a genre of music where it's like we write music, but we equally spend an amount of time creating a visual that is, I'll say, commercially viable, because a lot of bands have Alice Cooper as a thing. I wouldn't call him glam, but a very, say, sexually appealing, lighthearted, very pretty image. Mm-hmm. Like when I think of glam, I think of pretty. It's like I don't see a guy with a beer gut in winter. Everybody's very very, you're in shape. At least they were during that era. Not going to talk about those bands now. You're in shape. Your hair is very, done by Vidal Sassoon, and you got a little bit of makeup on. Or a lot of makeup on, and you're wearing your girl's yoga pants, and that is essential to what they do. Like would people find it disappointing or weird if you showed up to play a show without that? I think that's a deciding thing. Like if Winger showed up during that era wearing like shorts and t-shirts, people go like, no, like we want the fairy glamour, it's the as I call it, sparkly vampire syndrome. We want the bad boy, but that looks so good. And I think it's that. It's like if that style of image is crucial to your presentation, and it also says the parameters of your music, like you're not going to get a 7-minute introspective, dark cacophony from us. You're going to hear about women. You're going to hear about losing women. You're going to hear about kicking a little ass and drinking. And then how after it, you went and found some women. That's pretty much where the extent of our lyrical content is going to go. So I think it is pretty descriptive of it, and that's fair enough. And I think those bands would own up to it.
I agree. And I'm just sort of playing it in my head, how we got here, how society got to this position. And like I said, this is way beyond my time. It's in a different country. I'm examining the aftermath. From my position, it looks to me you had the 70s, where the 70s as a whole was more musically inclined in the way that music was. I might be speaking out my arse here, but it's my opinion, so this is not fact. It just feels like music was more part of people's lives. You had radio most of the time, or 8-tracks, I imagine. Musicians were musicians in the sense that you go to any club, a jazz club or whatever, and they knew their craft. They were playing musicians. Then by the 80s, oh my God, so at the end of the 70s, you had punk, American punk coming in. I'm thinking Ramones with the black jackets, the leather jackets, and they're still taking their cues from metal. Black clothes, darkness, long hair for the time. Mm-hmm. You come into the 80s and now things have changed. I've been watching The Deuce, which is a show about New York in the 70s. So I've got this in my head now. So you're coming from dirty New York City into the 80s. America's changing. America's waking up. We want to be clean. We want to be healthy. We have the exercise videos on TV. We're a brand new, clean, sparkly America. And music went the same way. It's no longer real life. It's now, this is what you could be. And it's glam. It's literally glam. It's like, this is what you could be. You're good looking. You wear makeup. You're colorful. Everything the 70s was not. So I feel like there's such a huge amount of cultural baggage that someone just decided, no, we're not going to be normal. We're going to be, I don't know, extremely colorful, and just not the 70s. And exactly. And one more point, if I may. To be this wild is just another like freak out your parents moment. It's like, look at all this color and my hair is up here, and makeup. Like, it wasn't like that in the 70s. So it's just another level.
I think it's part that, but say I think it goes in that direction, but slightly turns, especially like knowing the culture here and things. The 80s were directly a slapback against the 70s. Like, when I think of the American 70s, everything seems kind of gray.
Yeah.
Like, you look at the films from back then, it's a taxi driver and shit like that. Everything was dark. And I mean, you could see it across film culture coming out of the 70s. It's like it starts with like Star Wars. Like, being a hero was a good thing again. Instead of like, everybody's horrible. And people eventually get sick of that. At least I thought they used to. It seems like people never get tired of crying anymore. but they just it's kind of like people. I know how I can directly relate it, and I feel like it'll make sense. It's kind of like if you live, especially in the U.S., in a state that has heavy winters. It's as soon as spring hits and those first few days of warmth come up, people just lose their minds. They're just like, they're out there in like a G string and an eye patch, just no clothes, fucking running around. Yes. And they're just so happy to see like light and color and blue sky. And they just want to go batshit. They're just like, I'm going to have a hike and then I'm going to go biking and then I'm going to do a 9-mile swim and then I'm going to do a beer fucking kegger party and then I'm going to do an outdoor concert. And then, it's just like they can't stop because they're just like, I've been deprived for so long. And I think that was part of it too, is that the culture in the 80s changed and that it was like, hey, we can dig out of this and you don't have to feel like shit all the time. And then it became because everything became about the party. And it was like, I feel like leading this was like the Van Halen thing. Yeah. But it was like, you can be at the beach and the party can get bigger. And then it became, okay, how big can the party get? It's just like, we're going to keep escalating it. You got big hair. And it was this release of having to take things seriously. So it's I'm totally just not going to take myself seriously. It was like, you got big hair? Dude, I'm going to have bigger hair just because it's stupid. You got crazy clothes? I'm going to be even more crazy with the clothes. It was just this constant escalation of, and, it says something about the era too. I mean, this is the era of the big Coke wave. Yeah. Let's do an 8-ball and get stupid. And it's always just this upward escalation of, the 80s was the party. And for a lot of people, being the most outrageous guy at the party and having the most outrageous time was what you wanted to be. So it's just this one-upmanship going on. And that's why I would say, I mean, that kind of leads full circle. Not only back to your point, to what I was saying, it starts with the idea of a party. This, yay, we're in the sun, blah, blah, blah. That's not typically a metal thing. No. Being the popular guy at the party is generally not where the metal fan is. But so it had that, like when you think of metal from that era, you automatically think of California.
Yeah.
You don't think of New Jersey, or you don't think of New York even, or, it's the California beach party lifestyle. And that's why it's like that. Well, again, not shooting at that, but that kind of stands in the face of the aggression of metal and its darker edge and that kind of thing. So that's where, I think like where you get that glam thing, and then amplified on top of that is the entire new medium is one that says your visuals are becoming as important as your music, if not even more. So it's like, all right, well, let's just get stupid. Put on the clown makeup, do this, whatever we got to do. And, especially for a lot of young men coming up who are like, I just want to be in a famous band and be at the party. They're like, do this stupid hair and I get women and record contracts? Yes.
2 points on that. The first one that comes to mind is, you can correct me if I'm wrong, this sort of time is when American culture is kind of accepting that being in a band is your ticket to stardom. Like more relatable to how we are now with celebrity culture. You didn't really have it in the 70s and less so in the 60s, where I want to be in a band, I'm going to be famous, and now I'm going to be on TV. And that's like, again, we're just going to the next level, and it's a clearer goal. I want to be on MTV. And that kind of seems like that wasn't there before. Yeah. And that's, like you say, it's a party, I'm going to be on TV. And the other thing is, Glam seems to be a reaction to people who enjoy metal saying, why are you so sad? in your dark clothes. Why? Let's have a party. Let's be fun and have fun. It just seems like it's a reaction to that.
That one I'm not sure about because, again, they weren't metal to begin with. So I don't really
Yeah, it's
see
the
them
wrong
as
people.
reacting. I feel like it's more just this is the pop bandwagon. Everybody aboard, you know?
Mm.
Yeah, that they just had this thing of it because pop during that era, I mean, you're talking about Duran Duran, things like that, that so many, I feel like there's so much more in common with those bands
Mm-hmm.
than
Yeah.
like, I see Poison being closer to Duran Duran than I do Poison being to Metallica.
Yeah.
Uh, you can even see, and again, it was this incestuous biting off of each other. You can see, like, later on, as this came in, you would start hearing some of the bands like Duran Duran bite off of metal again. Like, what was I talking about the other day? And we talked about this before, but like they were very pretty, you know, even though they had great musicianship.
Mm-hmm.
John Taylor's an excellent bassist, but they had a very pretty image and they did interesting but pop songs. And then all of a sudden you see something like Wild Boys, where, it's like very, again, like road warrior looking and they got all the ripped up clothes. And I'm like, how did they start doing, and it's all very, heavy and hard beats and everything. And I'm
Percussive.
like,
Yeah.
yeah. And I'm like, dude, don't bite off of us. Come on, man. That was one of my worst bite off moments. I was like, oh, you bitches. But it's so you see, like, I see Wild Boys from Duran Duran and anything put out by Warrant as being like roughly the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see that blend of culture. Like, I can see a crossover in between, like, a song. Let me see. This is where I'm horrified to realize I even know these songs. It's like there was a somewhat darker, not darker, but at least mildly metal-ish song from Uncle Tom's Cabin from Warrant, and put that next to Wild Boys from Duran Duran. And you're on a pretty even playing field. That, like, I could almost hear the same band getting away with both tunes.
Mm-hmm.
I can't take even Uncle Tom's Cabin from Warrant and put it against Master of Puppets. Like,
Okay.
no, very distinct difference.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I mean. And that, I think that goes to kind of my argument too, is that glam leans so much heavier to pop because that's really what it is. It's pop that, again, just because they turned distortion on the guitars, because rock was big during that either, whether rock means Aerosmith or AC/DC or Van Halen or Wasp,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it means to you, that was what was coming up in that era. So it's like, let's be glam, turn the Marshall up a little bit, and
I wanna carry on with that point they've just made, and using the term pop. And when we use that, I mean it in, I guess, in its most meta sense of what is popular at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Transposing that now to today, I might need help with examples because I don't listen to today's popular music. But for example, popular music today leans on EDM or dance and hip hop, and it's kind of got like, there are different genres. Like, I'm going to be shooting myself in the foot now, but like pop EDM, or basically name any genre, any modern genre right now, and there'd be a pop version of it, a light version, EDM light, rap
Mm-hmm.
light, dance light, and that's pop. And that's what I'm saying, that they're like metal, they're biting into what's current and popular. And it just seemed like in the 80s, it was just time to bite off metal. And now today, the popular culture is biting off basically electric music, like dance.
Sure.
And that's the only one that really comes to mind. And you would say this is where I struggle with genres. There, I don't know what the hell's current, but popular dance music, pop dance. I don't know. Do you know what I'm getting at? So it's renaming a genre into pop something.
I would agree with that totally. I think it's a great example for current. And like, I think people who are very much into electronic music, you know, some of the real innovators, like you would take someone like Aphex Twin and ask him if he feels a connection to half of the, you know, the pop artists that are using EDM style beats in their radio hits, and go, do you consider yourself the same as them?
Yeah.
Do you see any resemblance? He'd be like, the only resemblance is we use the same drum machine.
Right.
Like, exactly. What are you even talking about?
Yeah.
So I think that's a great example for that difference there. So you can kind of see it's that one borrows sound from another while doing something completely different. And one is that thing.
Yeah.
You know, because again, if we were going to qualify this, ZZ Top has every bit as much guitar and distortion in it as Poison does. Why aren't they metal? Because they don't have the image. And they don't market themselves that way.
No.
They had an image, but it wasn't glam and it wasn't pretty, and they didn't dress like women and they didn't do the whole thing. So they didn't get put into there. But if you were just on, you know, just listening, it's like, well, why shouldn't they should qualify on those same things if just having a distorted guitar makes you metal. So I think that's kind of the final nail in the coffin of like, oh, these bands were metal in any sort. Like, no, they weren't. ZZ Top was heavier than half of these bands. So
that's true.
You know, you can't really put them in that category. But I think that leads us kind of to the second part of it, is kind of dissecting at that point then, are a lot of bands from that era fairly lumped into the hair category? Because again, like I can see Twisted Sister being called a hair band from that period, but I don't think they're a hair metal band. I think they accepted the image and moved forward with it, but they established themselves as something else first. I think they were a hard rock band that took on a more ridiculous image to adapt to the times.
Yeah.
I don't consider actually even Whitesnake that. I think they are a blues rock band that for a time, notice when that went out of fashion, they dropped it again and, you know, went on with things that got, you know, adopted a more glam image to fit in with the times. So I think a lot of the bands, especially of, you know, the wave of Sunset Strip that came out, you have an incredibly wide scope of what was all deemed metal. And I think it's unfortunate for a number of bands. And I think some people, at least from the comments that I gathered, thought that I was lumping all of the bands that came from the Sunset era into that same camp. And I think some of them got a raw deal from it, because when that stuff went out, it's like all metal just got shoved down the toilet, like it was this music. You know, when I hear these grunge jackasses who, you know, just are miserable and always want to pontificate about shit they don't know anything about. You know, we talk about, we were just done with the image and blah, blah. I'm like, not all those bands had that image. You know, again, you're going to have a hard time telling me that, well, that stuff had to go away because of Metallica. Like, they wear black t-shirts and jeans, kind of like you do. Oh, sorry, they didn't have as much flannel. But, you know, what are you talking about? Image. You know, by that era, even Slayer had dropped that whole thing. But, you know, that's a good example, too, is even though they didn't go glam, seeing the importance and how it seeped into everything. Look at early Slayer.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Now you mentioned it.
Yeah, especially Kerry King. I mean, that man was a walking porcupine of nails. And, like, I don't know how any guitar survived a set with that guy.
No.
And as soon as they could cast that stuff off, they kind of just left it alone. Like he was the last guy to kind of let it go. But they turned into a t-shirt and jeans band. And it was just, that was the thing at that time, though. If you were a rock star, you had to look different. You had to put on some kind of presentation. Another one I can think of is like Flotsam and Jetsam, when Jason Newsted was still in the band. They did like some public access TV videos of their shows and stuff. You can find them on YouTube. Go back and look at them. The singer's hair is all poofed out and he looks like one of the Golden Girls, and they're all wearing like animal print skin tight t-shirts and stuff. But they weren't playing music like that. But it was just understood, like, you have to do this. So I think there's some bands that were in that Sunset Strip kind of thing that I think some of them, it was kind of like Death by a Thousand Cuts of, some of them adopted that and did it because that's just how it was done. And I think some of them grew into it. And they let go of what they were in favor of that, and it wound up costing them. And, you know, that's what kind of led to the demise of all that type of stuff, you know?
Yeah, I'm trying to find a comparable era where bands are doing the same thing now. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I think I understand why. The whole thing, like we said, was about television. MTV, it's this brand new medium. You need to look a certain way. And again, it's going back to demographics. You want to market yourselves to males and females. So there's all of that in there. Some bands stayed with it. Some bands dropped it as soon as they could, like Pantera or Slayer. I don't think we've had another period like that. Like, even with the internet, there hasn't been bands that have.
I for sure
only in a sense of MySpace, where everybody jumped on MySpace to publish their songs or stuff like that, but not visually.
I do, for sure. New metal.
Yeah.
Absolutely new metal. The mandatory wallet chain, the pants 19 sizes too big that look like you're Gumby wearing, you know, these giant Jinko jeans things. Like twisting your beard into three things with the beads in it, having to have junkie makeup. So you always look like you were, you know, on a 7-day heroin thing. All one length, kind of greasy hair, or especially for guys, and isn't this delicious? The dippity-doo spiky hair thing that came in where, you know, you had to have the porcupine thing of like, you know, any bird attempting to rest on my head is immediately impaled, like, yeah, something out of Dracula.
Okay,
I mean, there was a whole fashion look. The short sleeve button up shirts, the Dickie shirts, and a gas station. You look like a gas station attendant, past his prime type of thing.
I know where you're coming from.
Just the chin piece, hair, yeah.
So bad.
Oh man.
Listen, I know where you're coming from. I think I'd have to slightly disagree in the sense that I would call that an evolution, because you had the grunge thing, and then there seems to be like there's a crossover between the goths from that time, the European techno, and then new metal and metal heads, and that just sort of come together, techno, goth, and metal, and that's what you're talking about. That's not the same thing with glam. That's completely, it's an evolution rather than a new product.
I would have to disagree there because, well, one, you know, arguing it didn't come through the same amalgamation, making it not a distinct image-oriented culture. I mean, that was what every goddamn guy looked like. He looked like Guy Fieri from, you know, the tasting thing. It became a mandatory look. If you were in a band during that period, you looked that way or you did not get the. Show me a new metal band with a video where the guys didn't look like that.
No, totally.
It became the mandatory look. So when something becomes a visual becomes the institutionalized way something has to look, then you have it. And you can look at it as an evolution, even though it was that escalation from there. all that stuff that really, the glam was based on was an evolution from David Bowie and the New York Dolls.
Yes.
So that evolved out of something else too.
Right. But would you not agree that the new metal look is closer to what we would define as metal from, I don't know, whatever you want to say, the late 70s and the underground 80s movement?
No, not. I
You
mean,
think it's completely different?
Yeah, I never saw gas station worker shirts and humongous jeans and
It's not. And
beard
makeup?
beads and
No. Mm, okay.
sticky hair. To me, it just says Hot Topic was a thing. You know.
The only reason I'm disagreeing is because to me, and maybe again, this is the same. I'm doing the same thing I did with Glam, where for me, I'm conflating the new metal look with the denim, leather, and patches. To me, this is all the same product. This is the same thing because I grew up with that. I grew up with both, and you've seen it as you were growing up. You've seen it change. But for me, I've seen the leather jackets and denim, and I've seen the new metal look with the wallets and the baggy jeans, whatever the fuck that was. I don't know. So maybe it's just an age thing between you and I. Like you've experienced it, and I've just grown up with it.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, look at any video covered or popular band in that era and show me a new metal band that didn't look like that. If it becomes an institutionalized part of an image, then it's the same thing as what happened in the 80s. You have to look like this to identify yourself as an MTV ready band. In this era, you have to be looking like this to be a YouTube presentable band.
Mm-hmm.
That was it. No spiky hair, no big pants, no radio play.
That's so wild.
Even the grunge thing, and it's why I always said it was complete, crap, this anti-image crap. Okay, then show me a grunge band that didn't look like they dressed at the Goodwill. It was an institutionalized image. You could not get on the radio, get on MTV, or be successful if you didn't look like a homeless lumberjack. The way it was. I mean, to even prove that point, look at bands like Megadeth even that started wearing flannel shirts. Like,
yeah.
If you were going to get played, it was more important to look like you were in that than even be different musically. They're still playing Megadeth shit, but they're dressing with these shirts, and that's how they're still touring. I think to drive that nail finally in the coffin, do you remember for a while, I don't know if you have VH1 over there.
Yeah.
But they used to have That Metal Show.
I'm sure I'd recognize it if I watched it, but I know the title, yeah.
It was hosted by Eddie Trunk, and he used to have on other musicians and stuff, and oddly one time he had on Mike McCready from Pearl Jam.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, But he came on and talked, and they talked about the fashion difference and how people blame grunge for killing metal and stuff. And McCready was like, I grew up on metal. Like, I love that stuff. He goes, I'm a huge metal fan. He goes, I'm like that, and he talked about it, and he said, I used to wear like Judas Priest t-shirts all the time, and that's what I was big into. And he said, so was this just a look for you? And he kind of dances around it, but he goes, no, but he goes, there is a thing though, that like with your audience, that if you present something like that, like they're not necessarily going to get it, or they're not. In other words, he was saying, if you go up and look like that, you will be labeled as someone who's into metal. Metal is not cool. You're out, even though you play in the grungiest of grungest. So it said, basically I had to start wearing flannel shirts and stop wearing my Judas Priest shirts because grunge audiences were not going to tolerate you not giving them the look. And
wow,
I mean, it goes to show.
I'm picking up, this isn't I'm not breaking new ground here. This isn't a light bulb moment, but again, the clouds are starting to disappear for me. We're going in cycles, musical cycles, where in the 80s you had to look beautiful, glamorous, and have that celebrity thing going on. In the 90s with grunge, you had people that just wanted to look like a lumberjack. They didn't really care how they looked. And again, the same with nu metal. You made sure you didn't look beautiful, right? There was an ugliness to you or a rawness. And now we're back into the Instagram thing and YouTube, and you're back to looking like a celebrity, being fit, healthy. How's your diet? How's your exercise? Beautiful looking, right? And it's just this cycle again. So it seems like the next cycle would be back to gas station attendant coming soon.
Oh, it's already coming.
Yeah, already you think?
Here. Oh God, yeah. The new metal thing is here, man. It's
the new metal.
Yeah. It's all those bands are creeping back. I keep hearing all the reunites. Limp Bizkit just put out an album. Okay.
Mudvayne.
Yeah. It's here. Get ready to groove in B flat. You know. But going back to, kind of that thing, I think when you look at bands from that era, you can kind of see what happened early on. And there's especially a few bands I was like, I didn't see how they got kind of put in that category to begin with. And even I had a hard time. Sometimes I could see it myself saying I liked some of these bands. Because,
which ones? Glam?
Well, not Glam, but ones I got who, to me, unfairly got put in the hair metal thing because everybody was doing that shit at that time.
Yeah.
And, it kind of tagged you as someone who might like that stuff. And I'm like, no, they're not the same. Like I said, I think calling Wasp a hair or glam metal band is absurd. They were a heavy metal band. Their image was dirty and insane and, that kind of thing. But even moving up the ladder from there, well, you can even see an arc here with like Motley Crue. When they come out, they're, they have kind of the, some elements of glam, but they were, very bondage leather. And then they got even more aggressive on Shout at the Devil. Shout at the Devil is a hard rock for its era metal album. And then they did the next album and they went full the fuck out glam. Even song wise, they got lighter, but then look what happened after that. You see the slow descent of what becomes acceptable. All of a sudden, the next album, it's all denim and leather. They still have the hair, but it's starting to calm down. Like you can watch the Motley Crue arc and see exactly all the stuff we're talking about. And, they kept it to a certain degree because it was part of how, what was recognizable about them, but it definitely calmed their asses down towards the end of that arc. So I think eras of Motley Crue get unfairly put in there. Like I'd say their first two albums, it isn't fair to lump them up as glam, and then after Theater of Pain, they just kind of became a rock band that stole a lot of shit from Aerosmith. When you look at, I think one of my favorites to pigeon into this category is Rat. They were a hard rock band, period. They had, the glam elements, the big hair and the spandex and all that. But if you had never seen them and just put that album on and listen to songs like Wanted Man, Christ, I mean, you could name 1,000 of them. You're going to hear stuff that, especially in that era, was mainstream hard rock, borderline metal. Their one band, though, I feel kind of jumped the shark with it, though, is that they adopted it and they did that, and they were very image conscious. But when it started to go away, they were leaning into it harder.
Weird.
Like when they had a song that came out like Way Cool Jr. or something like that. And it's like their songs were getting a little poppier as things were getting, don't do that. And the image was staying there and stuff. And I was like, I can remember seeing it at the time, just going like feeling like you're in a car with somebody that's heading towards a cliff and you're like, dude, push the brakes. Um, that, but I feel early on they had a glamour image, but so did everybody else. But they were a hard rock bordering metal band. They were, they were solid with that. I mean, you got Warren DeMartini, for God's sake. There's a lot of bands of that ilk that I think unfairly got put into that category because image got so big, you had to, that it was like, it was almost like this thing of like, oh, want to get big? Put on this image. And then once you put on the image, it was like, oh, but now if you ever had that image, now that's all you ever were in your crap. And it's like, wait a minute. You told me I had to have this look that I didn't necessarily have at the beginning. And I took it on and you made me famous. And now you're telling me I can't go anywhere after this because I had the look, probably the way I looked before was better.
It feels really chicken and egg. And I'm struggling with this from my perspective, but it feels like if you were a band with moderate success and a record company says, we want to give you another album or 3, however, you need to adhere to this dress code, for lack of a better word. And then once you've adorned the dress code and the costume, you have to write a certain way. You have to perform a certain way. It feels like you're really pigeonholing yourself by being the glam thing, which sounds like what happened with rap, where if you look that way, now you have to play a certain type of song or lyrical composition, all that kind of thing.
To a certain degree, but I don't necessarily agree with that. And that's kind of what I'm saying. Like, with a band like Rat, yeah, they had big radio hits and stuff, but rock and roll bands have radio hits. It's not like all of a sudden you have to go and be like, again, you're not writing Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner or something. You can write solid rock songs. I don't consider these bands metal. I consider them like the just under the line of Judas Priest stuff. It's like Priest had singable lyrics. We would never call them glam.
No.
But, Living After Midnight could very easily be on the first Rat album.
Yeah.
So you have to be fair in kind of the assessment of it and stuff. You could take, what was the one with the great guitar riff intro from Rat, where he's kind of detuned. Every guitar player in Guitar Center ever plays that goddamn riff. Lay It Down.
I don't know.
Okay. Listen to that riff and that song. That's every bit as heavy as some mid-era Judas Priest. They even have songs that are, they have songs heavier than that too. So having that equivalency, that's what I mean. I feel like it's somewhat unfair in that, you wouldn't call Priest glam. So why is it fair to necessarily put that mantle on these bands? But anyway, and kind of dropping stuff, I think if you really look at that era, like I said, it was that the look was so omnipresent that some bands, it was like anybody that could be shoved into that category was. So as much as I absolutely, and I think I've made my case that glam is not metal, it bears no resemblance to metal in any kind of way. That there were also a lot of bands, when I say that, or I think when other people say that they automatically assume that's what you mean. A quick, again, aside, look at Aerosmith from that era. The hair got big for Tyler, they always had a little bit of an image, but it went a little more glam during that time and everything.
Yeah.
We're not calling them a hair band, and you look at some of their songs and it's kind of like they're heavier than Poison. So why wouldn't they be metal? So I think there was a lot of, fuckery that goes on with that and stuff. And, when you can start throwing traditional metal bands like Armored Saint into hair band just because they came from California and the Sunset Strip scene or something like that, every metal band had that look. I could go really deep with it. And, it is, like I said, I've always found a little bit of a mystery. I think it's just what it comes down to a lot of times too was MTV prominence. like some C-level metal bands from that era that I used to listen to and stuff like Grim Reaper. Uh, you look at their first album, chunky little singer hopping around, short hair, big ass gap in his teeth and everything. No thing. And then the second album, he's got this big buckskin, you know, jacket underneath the thing, big poofed out hair and shit like that because you had to do it.
Weird.
But nobody's calling Grim Reaper a hair metal band. I think it's because they just didn't get big enough on MTV. Seriously, if you want to see that one too, go and watch Grim Reaper's videos. Watch the first one. I think he's wearing like parachute pants in the first one, something like that. But watch the first one and then watch the later one where he's got his hair all poofed out. It's like same band. They're same level of heavy, Judas Priest heavy. You know, Nick Balcott came from there. And they've got the look, they got the whole thing going on. Everybody had it. But if you got on MTV and people saw you next to the glam stuff and that image crossover started to happen, you got put into the same category. And I don't think it was always fair because I hate me some glam.
So what you're saying is, Rodney, that TV is terrible for your health. Is that it? Was it rots your brain?
Yes, it is. Except for when you're watching Rodney and Alfie.
Well, we're not on TV.
This is TV now. Like the Peace Sells video. This is the news. But yeah, so I mean, at least in my conclusion, the wrap up is, as always, I was right about glam. It's not metal. It's crap. And it got stuck onto us, and like a dog turd on your shoe, it unfairly makes people think you stink. So,
well, I'd like to thank you for clearing things up because, like I said, I always conflated glam metal with metal and maybe misappropriately labeled, kept the label in my head when it shouldn't have been there. And that brings us into the whole other discussion of how metal is heavier than heavy metal, but that's a discussion for a different day.
All right then.
Well, Rodney, where can people find you online?
Usually on the most wanted list. But aside from that, if you're hitting YouTube at Rodney McG. And yourself?
And you can find me on YouTube by searching Witchbase. And as I've been saying the past few weeks, there will be content to be coming soon.
All right then. Well, I think that's going to wrap it for this week. As always, comments, thoughts, hate mail, send away. And we will see you next time.
See you next time.